Il Club di Milano presents Faith and Art, Artists for the 2025 Jubilee. When reading rests on lightness, the art and function of ambos. Drawings by Nicoletta Reinach Astori, research by Antonio Bonelli. By Fabiola Giancotti. Translation and narration, Rachel Jane Roberts. So Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly, both men and women and all who could understand what they heard, on the first day of the 7th month. And he read from it facing the square before the water gate, from early morning until midday, in the presence of the men and the women and those who could understand. And the ears of all the people were attentive to the book of the law. And Ezra the scribe stood on a wooden platform that they had made for the purpose. And Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, for he was above all the people. And as he opened it, all the people stood. And Ezra blessed the Lord, the great God, and all the people answered, Amen, Amen, lifting up their hands. And they bowed their heads and worshipped the Lord, with their faces to the ground. Nehemiah 8, 2-6. In the first millennium, an impressive architectural structure welcomed readers of the Christian word into city cathedrals. The ancients had a name for it, the ambo. It was a structure that soared upwards, placed at a point where the voice sounded clearer, to which the congregation would raise their faces, turn their eyes, and incline their ears. Architecture, like painting and sculpture, can meet this need and design unique works. Patrons, artists and craftsmen strove to make the ambo an integral part of the liturgical celebration, astounding in its beauty, inexhaustible in its narration. To tell the story of the art and function of this artefact, our starting point is the book Ancient Italian Ambos, Masterpieces of Sculpture by Antonio Bonelli, with a series of Indian ink drawings by Nicoletta Reinach Astori. Surprisingly, although the authors amassed an impressive photographic archive, there are no photographs in the book. In this way, using words and drawings instead of photographs, the authors prick our curiosity as they accompany us on our journey. But we must start with a premise, a brief note on what remains of one of the oldest ambos in art history. In the right-hand transept of the Cathedral of Parma, we find the deposition of Benedetto Antelami, sculpted in April 1178, in red marble from Verona, and still intact on the only surviving panel of the ambo. The beautiful composition stands out against layered excerpts taken from the Gospel of St. Matthew, and the panel presents yet another page of this narrative. All the protagonists are present. No one is missing from the deposition scene, and each character plays their part unreservedly. Antelami captures the despair, the piety, the dismay, and the hope of the disciples. But he also conveys the zeal and dissatisfaction of Christ's executioners. Between Pisa, Siena and Perugia, the same virtuosity can be found in the sculptural narratives of the Ambos designed by Nicola and Giovanni Pisano. Antonio Bonelli and Nicoletta Reinach Astori tell us about another 78 ambos built between the 6th and 13th centuries, all of excellent craftsmanship and scattered throughout Italy, mostly in Romanesque-style Christian buildings. They can be found in cities both large and small, in the countryside and in monastic settlements. The ambo was an elevated construction that one climbed in order to read the Word of God. As tall as a tower or like the summit of a mountain, it stood on columns and, from its earliest incarnation, often had one flight of steps to climb up and another to descend. Built in stone or marble to a square, rectangular, or in some cases oval or even polygonal plan, the panels that transformed the platform into a box on one or more sides were carved, inlaid, or painted. The box is a container resting upon columns and enclosed on the sides by parapets, plutii, or marble panels, which turn the construction into a loggia or balustrade. A wooden tribune, a hill, a mountain, or an empty tomb. From here, the word spreads and is disseminated throughout the world. Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back, although it was very large. And the angels said, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen. Go and tell his disciples and Peter." From the Gospels. The body of the dead Christ lies in the tomb for 3 days. When Christ is resurrected, the tomb opens. John is the only evangelist to see the event for himself, and he is the first to bear witness to the fulfillment of the word. Like the eagle that flies towards the sun without fearing its light, John welcomes the risen Christ with no fear of death. And he becomes the first reader and the first announcer of the resurrection and of his ascension. This is why the eagle, like the evangelist, is often carved with outspread wings supporting the main lectern of the ambo. The ambo is not a place, that would be impossible. Rather, it represents the very instant in which Christ is risen. Hence, it is the means by which the news reaches the listener. Its echo cannot be contained in a closed box. Once open, the box is the affirmation that the Word of God cannot die. The lectern is what differentiated the ambo from the pulpit. On the lectern lay the book. Nothing but the biblical text and the proclamation of the resurrection could be uttered from the ambo, and the reader received careful instruction in this task. He had to stand erect and enunciate clearly in tones that were never submissive but had an incisive timbre. When read aloud, the word attains an oral quality or orality that reaches each listener with varying intensity. Some understand at a first reading, others at a second or third reading. The stories of Christianity are many, and a variation of tone or timbre is enough to convey meaning and understanding. Each time it is written, the word is new, unprecedented, never the same twice, and this is the invention of Catholicism. There exists no standard, system or genre for ambos. From the very beginning, their construction was entrusted to artists, many of whose names are still unknown to us, and they remain anonymous. The style of craftsmanship depends on the historical period, on the techniques used, and on various subsequent alterations. No two ambos are alike, although the school or workshop of some are known. Their variety depends on the designer, the master craftsman, the artisans, the materials, the structure of the host building, and on the patron's investment. The combination of arts is highly varied. Architecture, sculpture and painting mix with draftsmanship, mosaic, marquetry, decoration and writing. And they are composed along theoretical lines taken from theology, literature, science and poetry. Styles vary from Byzantine to Romanesque, from medieval to Renaissance, and from modern to contemporary. Other architectural elements include the columns, on which the boxes rest, which vary in number and appear with or without capitals. The pedestals or bases from which the columns rise resemble men, lions or other animals. Sometimes imposing male figures or telemons lean against the capitals and at the corners support two panels of the box. Impossible to distinguish between figurative and abstract art, some compositions combine images, drawings and decorations, from which neither the figure nor the abstraction is missing. Others contain portraits, individual or grouped figures, men and animals, elaborate scenes, landscapes, symbols and masks. Anthropomorphic figures hint at the human with freely drawn proportions and perspective. Zoomorphic figures recount the fantastic with anatomical expertise. Foliage, friezes, acanthus and laurel leaves, herbs and flowers of all kinds, trees and shrubs present a phytobiomorphic encyclopedia that is occasionally fictional. Angels and demons tell of the vault of heaven and the fire of the abyss. The oldest ambos have a simple and essential architectural structure, decorated with elaborate curlicues coming from other traditions. Extremely modern geometric motifs incised on other panels could almost be the work of Mondrian or Malevich. Among the oldest artefacts, Antonio Bonelli has found parts of one or two ambos from the 6th century. One in the Cathedral of Ravenna, the other in the Museo Diocesano of the same city. Known as the ambo of the Lamb, the first of these is convex in the centre, flat at the sides, and its entire surface is covered with a series of framed squares, arranged horizontally and vertically, and containing repeatedly mixed motifs of lambs, peacocks, deer, doves, ducks and fish, all carved with infinite delicacy. Those on the right look towards the left and vice versa. The inscriptions on the upper edge may refer to the builder and the patron. The second ambo has the same compositional structure in marble. Possibly contiguous at one time to that of the cathedral, it is a little more recent and more coarse-grained than the first one. As with the other ambos, Nicoletta Reinach Astori proposes her version in Indian ink, creating a portrait of it. Here we have both a marble panel and a portrait on paper. With her precise lines and measurements, Nicoletta neither distorts the panel nor attempts to interpret it. The same narrative power we found in the marble is evident on the sheet of paper, and it is a work we can admire even without comparing it to the photograph or to the original. Nicoletta's drawing is a work of art in its own right, that both enhances and strengthens the portrait of this ambo in Ravenna. Furthermore, her reading of the ambo, despite some necessary stylization, leaves its characteristics intact, without diminishing any of its majesty or lightness. The Museo Diocesano di Arte Sacra in Ancona houses part of the ambo from the Church of Santa Maria della Misericordia. There are 2 marble panels from the box, truncated at the bottom. 2 rows of 4 columns are visible. Those in the centre support a tympanum. The edges and interiors are decorated and framed with floral motifs and intertwined branches. Above runs an epigraph. Here there is momentum and movement. There is a tree, there is foliage, there is a page, and an air of soaring inspiration. In the Basilica of Santa Eufemia di Grado, in the province of Gorizia, there is an ambo dating back to the 11th century of Byzantine inspiration, with inserts from later eras, and a box made up of concave panels on which the symbols of the evangelists are carved in high relief. It rests on 6 slender columns, with capitals decorated with foliage. Access is by a single flight of steps. A polychrome dome from a later era, supported by long, fine columns, gives a marked upward thrust. Nicoletta's ink portrait places this curious ambo in the basilica that houses it, and appropriates a wall from the architectural context, with a window whose falling light renders the ambo even more elongated. Imagine being in this basilica in the 11th century. From this ambo, the voice of each reader would fall like rain or snow onto the bystanders, as in the words of Isaiah, and for their ears, the tone, the sound, and the voice of those who read the words of the Bible would have to suffice. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return there, but water the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. Isaiah 55:10-11. In those days, books were precious codes. Before the arrival of printing, when amanuenses had to transcribe them, texts were written with scriptio continua, continuous script, an uninterrupted sequence of letters with no space between one word and the next, with no chapters, paragraphs, or punctuation. It was the reader's task to separate the words, create pauses, compose sentences, and understand the text, underlining the emphases and modulating the tone. Moreover, the writings were not in the vernacular, but in Latin or even Greek, languages that were unfamiliar to many in the congregation. Any communication would have been impossible if the reader had not found some kind of expedient. Many listeners knew the sounds of the words by heart, but not their meaning. Meaning derived from the tone with which the reader read the words, or from the position he adopted standing at the lectern. It derived, therefore, from the humility and generosity with which he tried to read these texts. And if that was still not enough, there were the elaborate decorations on the ambo's loggia, and on the columns, the symbols and the inscriptions made by the artists, who were sometimes the only ones able to deliver the Christian message. In support of the Testament reading came the preaching, and the ambo, deprived of its lectern, was gradually superseded by the pulpit, from which the preacher could recount the scriptures without having to read them. As artefacts, pulpits are every bit as beautiful, fascinating and marvellous, and they are often mistaken for or confused with ambos. The ambo in the Basilica of Sant'Ambrogio in Milan is one of the most important in the Christian world. The architectural complex, with its rectangular plan, has undergone many alterations throughout the centuries, and is supported by other works into which it has been fully integrated. An inscription on one of the panels says that Guglielmo de Pomo had this, like other works, rebuilt in 1200, following the collapse of the vault which almost destroyed it. Of the original decorations, only the panel resting on the left-hand span survives. The scene is divided horizontally into two parts. On the lower half, episodes from a vigorous battle are portrayed, interwoven with various plants and animals and rich in symbols and allusions. The upper half depicts a supper with a strangely uneasy and suspended composition. Possibly unfinished, it is nevertheless of excellent craftsmanship. 3 panels dating from after the reconstruction are unadorned. An unusual sculptural group in copper is attached to the central panel, portraying a large eagle above a figure seated on a throne, possibly Matthew the Evangelist. This group supports the lectern which rises above the balustrade. The ambo is supported by 9 arches with slender columns of varying design. On these columns, the rich narrative of the Ambrosian text introduces various characters from Earth's biography, while jumbling up their kingdoms. This piece is perhaps unique in its immense variety. We find zoomorphic figures, such as the pelican that tears at its own breast to feed its young, 2 peacocks feeding from the tree of life, a deer bitten by a snake and then healed by Christ, a cockerel chasing a chimera, an ass with a lyre, incessant chains of animals, a mermaid with 2 tails as a symbol of prosperity, a phoenix, a unicorn, a dragon, the months of the year, trees and foliage, enmity and fighting between men and beasts, plants and inhospitable forests. The lunettes depict scenes from the Bible and the Gospel. Older still, and located below the ambo, is the early Christian sarcophagus known as the sarcophagus of Stilicho. Probably contemporary with Sant'Ambrogio, it is a brilliantly executed sculptural composition of Christian scenes. Completely covered in carvings and rich in figures and narratives, it could easily have formed the basis for the training of all subsequent ambo builders. Located, guarded and protected under the ambo of Sant'Ambrogio, it is an integral part of the ambo itself. The story of the Nativity unfolds on the lid, while on the various panels the lives and deeds of the prophets, as well as some episodes from the life of Christ, are depicted. In the background of each scene appears the landscape and walls of the city. The figurative density of the Stilicho sarcophagus influenced the decision not to replace the 9 destroyed panels from the Sant'Ambrogio ambo. The ambo of the Cathedral of Sessa Aurunca, dating back to the 13th century, also includes an Easter candle in the design. Often located next to the ambos, the candle or candelabrum recalls the pillar of fire that accompanied the Jews on their flight from Egypt. At its base, 1 or more lions or floral motifs prophesy the coming of the Messiah. 2 columns are twisted together and rise up to end under a single capital. The twisting effect is created by the design, the decorations and the colours. If the ambo is adorned with flowers, they must be living and uncut. When the candle is lit, its light burns strong and radiant. In the architectural complex of the Sesaurunca ambo, the candle depicts scenes with human figures, carved on the base, on the capital, and on the two bands wrapped around it at different heights. There are also human figures on the capitals and on the arches of the columns that support the rectangular box. The panels are decorated with mosaics displaying elaborate arabesque motifs composed of curves, polygons, and spirals. The infinite volumetric layers of cathedral architecture composing the work make it difficult to distinguish its edges. Surrounded by overabundance, the ambo refuses to be cropped or concealed. Here, Nicoletta comes to our aid, isolating the ambo from its context and presenting it alone in all its majesty, in a way that neither a photograph nor the human eye could do. However, in this journey of ours, the context is important. The ambos are located in different places in the churches. Some are adapted to the architecture. For example, they may have 3 or 4 sides, depending on whether they are supported by columns or mounted on a wall. There are variations in height, in the base, the design of the platform and the stairs, and even in the number of readers who can be present simultaneously. At first glance, we might appreciate the global view or be attracted to a particular detail, but an architectural feature isn't always designed to be admired in its context. On other occasions, however, the ambo stands isolated and is itself enough to make a particular view quite marvellous. The context is important to understand the strategy behind its location within the plan of the building, and therefore its function and artistic value. Nicoletta extrapolates the ambo from its context. From her drawings, it is impossible to say which church houses the ambo, or where it is situated within that church. We cannot see if it hides something, or is hidden by something else. But she excludes nothing from the ambo itself and its complexity, if not perhaps the temptation of weighty substance. Every aspect is rendered with the lightest of touch. The lines, shapes, volumes, heights, and all other elements find a vanishing point and are recomposed in Indian ink. The word is original, and no text, either written or read, can maintain this originality unless it avails itself of the oral tradition, of orality. This practice can be neither learned nor copied. It results from the integration of the life skills we acquire, and as the combinations are incalculable and unimaginable, each component, language, written texts, books, cities, the environment, churches, squares and their social, artistic and cultural context, participates in this narrative, inspiring people to listen and generating further narratives. Otherwise, there would be no art or culture. We would have no writers, artists, poets or readers. Without lightness, everything becomes a millstone that prevents anyone from contributing to civilization. In St. Mark's Cathedral in Salerno, there are 2 monumental ambos, the Guarna and the Daiello, named after their patrons. Construction dates from between the 11th and 12th centuries. The larger ambo rests on 12 granite columns with capitals carved with foliage, animals and masks. It has a large rectangular loggia whose panels are decorated with a mosaic of glass paste and pure gold that blends curves, segments, points, curlicues and other geometric designs, varying in size, colour and shade, which also feature in the floor design. It has 2 lecterns, one of which is supported by the figure of an eagle, holding in its talons the head of a man who in turn struggles with a snake. On the other hand, full-length figures of women, men and fantastic creatures, intertwined with naturalistic elements, adorn the capitals of the smaller ambo. Both works, built with the expertise of master craftsmen, bring to mind illuminated manuscripts, the one printed on a page, the other sculpted in white marble. The dynamism, the volutes, the colours and reflections all contribute to both the narrative and its interpretation. Nicoletta's ink drawings capture both their momentum and their delicacy. Very similar to the ambos in Salerno are the 2 in the Cathedral of Ravello. Curves, volutes and spirals return, and the impossible measuring of the earth, no longer considered flat at that time, geometry, becomes a drawing of the earth, geography. The first ambo, dedicated to the reading of the Gospel, dates back to the 13th century. It rests on 6 columns supported by lions. An eagle with closed wings serves as a lectern. The mosaics are composed of Syrian ceramic tiles. There have been many additions and restorations. The second ambo, dedicated to the reading of the epistles and located in front of the first one, is older, dating back to the 11th century. It has 2 opposing staircases and a central access door. The decorations on the base panels, finely assembled by mosaic masters, present the symbol of infinity. Above, on either side of the lectern, are 2 polychrome figures, one representing Jonah being eaten by the whale, the other showing him being regurgitated. Nicoletta's drawings present both works in all their grandeur, but she doesn't stop there. The lions supporting the first ambo seem ready to walk off with it. The eagle appears to be on the point of spreading its wings. In the drawing of the second ambo, the whale, in its act of swallowing and then regurgitating Jonah, is far more fluid and agile. Barga Cathedral in the province of Lucca houses yet another beautiful and priceless ambo, dating from the 13th century. Here too, there is no organised system, no repeated motif. The box rests on 4 solid red columns in red marble. 2 columns are supported by bearded old men, the other 2 by lions, of which one is devouring a man, the other a beast. One capital hosts a group of eagles with outspread wings. The others are decorated with foliage. 3 of the side panels are richly carved with scenes from the Gospel. The 4th side rests against a pillar of the cathedral. The art of writing is frequently integrated into the work. We find inscriptions on columns, around the base, on strips and panels. Sometimes they indicate the names of the designer, builder or patron. At others, they immortalize a title, dedication or quotation. On the ambo of the Cathedral of San Valentino in Bitonto, the engraved epigraph leaves a testimony and a life lesson in a very decided tone. Docta manus me fecit, ad hoc ut lectio vitae hic recitata ferat fructus mentis. Learned hands have made me, so that the lesson of life recited here will bear the fruits of the mind. The work, which is mounted against the right-hand pillar of the cathedral's triumphal arch, was designed by Master Nicolaus in 1229. The loggias are decorated with abstract motifs, including small polychrome arches and squares with internal rosettes. The plumage on the closed wings of the eagle recalls the feathers and the colours of the peacock. The eagle supports the heavy lectern and is in turn held aloft by a visibly straining telemon. The dense interweaving of the elements gives the marble a fine delicacy, and Nicoletta represents it without losing any of its momentum or tension. A curious marble ambo from the 12th century can be found in Borgo San Lorenzo, near Florence. This unusual stylized work has a polygonal box resting on simple columns. The panel decorations suggest variously shaped vessels with wider or narrower spouts and with no historical references or religious symbols. Inlaid on white marble, the lines seem almost to have been drawn by a large pen in black ink. On the lectern, stripes of white and green marble are alternated at 2 vertical levels. The large reading stand bears no inscription. The whole comes across as an unexpectedly modern and out-of-context painting. There are no precise interpretations of the figures. Placed as decorations on an ambo supported by columns, to observe them, we are forced, as with the others, to gaze upwards. Antonio Bonelli provides highly detailed technical, symbolic and literary descriptions. He adopts an architectural jargon that may seem difficult at a first reading, but invaluable at a second. He also provides a topographical map and puts forward several considerations that have escaped the experts. He points out how involved the artists were in their work, telling the story of their own artefact, how they intended it to be not only a beautiful work of artistic value, but also a work of faith, of communication and devotion with a clear purpose. He has therefore collected a wealth of information. Antonio Bonelli has a special preference for the wonderful yet lesser-known ambos, or those by unknown artists, whereas what remains of Antelmi's bas-relief, the brilliant sculptures and architecture of Nicola and Giovanni Pisano, and Donatello's extravagant pulpits are left in the background. Almost all of his descriptions find a parallel in Nicoletta's work. Both Antonio's writing and Nicoletta's drawings are inspired by some of the issues that arose during their research. Questions without answers, the impossibility of assigning meanings to signs, shapes and compositions. Nicoletta's work is neither a copy of a life portrait nor of a photograph. Neither is it an illustration to a travel journal. The necessity of writing arises from having worked closely and at length with Antonio, from having embraced some of the questions they asked themselves about the history of these works, and from having represented them with her art, her skill, and her own interpretation. This is her reading, but it is neither a commentary nor a moralistic or religious vision. Neither does it have the macabre flavour that can be found in some later ambos. The ambos that Antonio and Nicoletta bring to our attention explore life, just as the artists who worked on them did. They do not depict life in its reality, but rather hand it back to us with their own interpretation. Life goes on. The sense or idea of death as an end cannot triumph. From the ambo, the resurrection is proclaimed. The Christian narrative insists that things do not end, life does not end, and the word can never be taken away. One way or another, with the contribution of artists and readers, this also means being willing to listen. We have not considered the ambos in Ancona, Rome, Florence, Ferrara, Modena, Palermo, Pistoia, Siena, Venice and others, even though they are included in the book. However, we are publishing an e-book with the same title, which, in addition to our narration, contains each of Nicoletta's graphic illustrations and the captions with historical and architectural information about each of the ambos we have dealt with. When reading rests on lightness, the art and function of ambos, by Fabiola Giancotti. Translation and narration, Rachel Jane Roberts.